Last time I was at my local craft store, I found this in the clearance section. And it was in the clearance section because, as you'll see soon, the side was completely busted open. But it had all of its parts, and I was inspired. So I took it home and started putting it together. As I was putting this together, I asked my internal 5-year-old self, what besides pirates are really cool? And my internal 5-year-old self said, spaceships and sharks. And I said, well, internal 5-year-old self, that's 2 things, but I will see what I can do. And so this project became the space pirate ship, and you'll see where the shark aspect comes in later. How do you turn a pirate ship into a space pirate ship? Well, you add rocket boosters. In my case, I'll be using PVC parts. These are 1/2-inch repair couplings, three-fourths to 1/2-inch couplings, and 1/2-inch 45-degree couplings. Using my Dremel tool, I take away some material on the sides of these 2 couplings to make sure that when I put them together, they have less of a gap. I do a bit more cutting and shaping to make sure everything fits together nicely. Using some armature wire and some 2-part epoxy clay called milliput, I fill the nose cone of the rocket and then use some sandpaper to sand everything down and make it nice and flush. To attach the rocket to the pirate ship, I did have to do some shipbuilding alterations to make it fit, including cutting off the bottom and then cutting out these grooves in the side to fit the shape of the rockets. Before attaching the rocket to the ship, I drill some holes in the side and then add armature wire that I pre-bent to shape to add some depth and detail. Using some styrene, I make a bunch of these little pieces that will go on the end of my rocket to form the thrust nozzle. At this point, I can glue the 2 halves together. There will be some gaps I need to fill, but that's nothing a bit of milliput can't fix up. So I'll shove those into the gaps, and then from the other side, I'll come back with some rubbing alcohol and some tools and smooth everything out. I wanted to build up the stern of the ship to make it a little bit bigger to match the size of the rocket boosters I added. It just looked a little unproportional. So I used this thick cardstock and I'm building a second level for the captain's quarters. And it will just slide over the original stern and give our captain's cabin a second level. Then using some styrene sheets, I remake all the windows, This took quite a long time because it was very tedious to cut out every single piece, but I think it was worth it. I'll be using these N-scale styrene ladders, and I'll be cutting them in half, and then using them as railings on the side of the extension I just built. I'll be using this action figure blaster and cutting it up and turning it into an engine block. I felt that the deck that I made needed a little something to fill up space, and this seemed to work well. Now here's where that shark thing that I talked about earlier comes into play. I'm using these pieces of styrene to make a jaw that will fit on the front of the ship. Now this was inspired by Davy Jones' ship from the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, and eventually I'll paint the metal so it looks like these pirates added this huge metallic shark jaw on the front, because that's pretty cool. Unfortunately, my little angel figurehead had to get chopped off to make room for the new bowsprit I was putting in. And this is just made out of a thick wooden skewer. After a coat of black primer, I take a really soft makeup brush and do a dry brush of a really light gray. For the wood paint, I'm using this Citadel contrast paint, and from my very limited knowledge of these paints, I don't think they have a specific wood color. I may be wrong, but this seemed to work pretty well for what I needed. For the rigging, I used this lighter contrast color for a rope color. It was about the closest thing I could find. I used this Iron Warrior's base paint to paint any part that was going to be metallic, so that included the shark teeth, the rocket, the cannons, and the little engine block on the back. Once everything has its base coat of paint, I can start the weathering process. This is just black wash. It's a mix of black acrylic paint and water, and I put it anywhere that I want to be extra grimy. Then I take a paper towel and dab most of it away, and this leaves paint in all the crevices and cracks and gives a lot of detail. This is my first time using these particular rust paints, and they worked really well for me. I start with the more orange rust paint, and using a sponge, I stipple on everywhere, and anywhere where the sponge couldn't reach, I'll just use a regular paintbrush and get into those hard to reach places. So I start with the lighter orange and then move on to the darker brown rust and paint on top of that to give that natural rust look where the deeper the rust is, the darker it is. The rust was still a little bit bright for me, so I'm using a black wash, this time with a little less pigment in it, to bring down the colors. Using this sewing thread, I'm going to make some of the rigging on the ship, and I start by making a bunch of rope coils in different forms that I can use around the ship. So for this one, a round coil, I'm using a wooden skewer, wrapping it around, tying it off and gluing it, and then for these more elongated ones, I'm using a piece of cardstock. And I'm definitely no sailing ship expert, but I'm using some reference images to see where the more predominant rigging was and just adding those. But if I added every piece of rigging that would actually be on a real ship, there would be more thread than boat in this model. This hole I'm covering here is actually from the original helm, or the steering wheel of the ship, that ended up moving up to the top deck. And no pirate ship is complete without its Jolly Roger. I'm keeping mine pretty simple, doing the traditional skull and crossbones, but instead of the crossbones, I'm doing the crossed planetary rings. Hey, if you're still here, thanks for sticking around to the end of the video and watching the whole thing. As always, I will leave a bunch of links to all of the tools and materials that I used in the description below. Check that out. They are Amazon affiliate links, which basically just means that if you buy something through that link, I get a small commission, you don't pay anything extra. It's a win-win. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, put them down in the comment section and I'll try to get back to you. If you enjoyed this video, I do have others on my channel that are similar. Go check those out. I'll put some cards at the end so you can see. Again, thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.